miniaturized. You don't need people to say yes anymore. You just go for it and you make the film. This is a GoPro camera that I will be shooting some of my next films on. Look at that. That is much smaller than a camera, and that's cinema quality. So the question of funding used to be the big impediment or the big wall between the filmmaker and the film. And now the wall has dissolved in many ways. It's no longer there, or rather we have kicked a hole through the wall. And so we just make the work and then hopefully find a way of showing it.
Yeah. What first sparked your interest to make a film about children and cinema history?
A lot of my work in some way has been about children. One of the first things I directed was about a children's festival in Scotland where I live, and my first film for the big screen was called The First Movie, and it was about children in Iraq. And I think that what excites me about making something about children is that they are pretty uncensored. They're not. When someone becomes a teenager, then they're trying to be cool. But little children, they're not trying to be cool particularly. You can just see their naked desires and their joys, and they don't hide their emotions. And I love that. And so when you make a film about children like this one, you're looking at emotions that hopefully many of us can identify with. Like showing off, or anger, or shyness. Well, these are things that we all feel each week, but we try to cloak them or hide them as grown-ups. But I just love the kind of naked, unhidden things that we see in children. And that thing that Pablo Picasso said, that all children are artists, and the problem is how to make sure that they remain so as they grow up. And there's some truth in that, I think.
Yeah. Can you describe a bit, how you first started out with the work? You showed me some pieces here before.
Yes.
A small sketch, which is also in the beginning of the film.
Yes.
Could you?
Yeah. This film, it's pretty much as I describe it in the movie. I had been filming with my niece and nephew one morning in my apartment. And as you can see, my apartment's kind of white, and they made this very colourful marble run, and I thought, oh, that looks nice, let's get the camera out, a tiny little camera, put it on the ground, filmed for 11 minutes, thought nothing of it. I film all the time. And then I was in a hotel room one night, and I looked at the footage, the image, the shot, and I thought the children were just so relaxed. They were it's if they had a kind of space to be themselves. I love this word agency, where you're not, they weren't scared, they were just doing what comes naturally to them. And so I thought, wow, in that little shot, there is a kind of microcosm, there's a kind of whole world in that few minutes. And so I thought, maybe I could elaborate that world if I could show that cinema around the world has been trying to show exactly what those children did: be shy, be aggressive, be performative, etc. So it was as simple as that. Never intended to be a film, and it just came out of the accident. I was talking about someone earlier about the accident and the chance in the filmmaking process, and I think that's a strong element. Just as accident is a strong part of painting, so it should be of filmmaking.
But what about all the films? Do you have them in your head, or do you have to research very few?
Some of them I had in my head. A lot of these films I knew for ages I wanted to do something with this extraordinary Iranian film called Willow and Wind. The one where the boy is holding the glass under his chin, which is a masterpiece. It's almost unshown anywhere outside of Iran. So I knew a lot of the films, and I knew that in terms of American cinema, there were some films that I wanted to look at. But I also asked friends in different countries what their recommendations would be for the best films in their country. So my friend Anita Oxberg, who's here this evening, and I asked her about Swedish films, and she told me about Hugo och Josefine, and I hadn't seen it, and I saw it, and I thought, wow, wow, you know, that the plenitude in this film, the joy and the complexity, and the relationship between the children and the adult.
Yeah,
it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's a process of discovery. In the Czech Republic, I knew some of the films that I wanted to show, but I asked this guy, Karel Hoch, who's the director of the Karlovy Vary Film Festival, and he mentioned this documentary called On Scene, which is about blind children taking photographs, which is in here. And I watched it and I loved it, and particularly the bit where the blind child says, "Is this a cat or a dog?" I thought that was magnificent. You know, so moving, isn't it? And if you care about the poetics of cinema, as soon as I saw "Is this a cat?" "Is this a cat or a dog?" I thought that's a profound question, and so I knew that it would recur, that phrase would recur in my film. And so when I show a horse a little bit later on, I say, "Is this a cat or a dog?" And one of the reasons for doing this is when you make a film like this, which has no storyline, there's absolutely no story here, you want to say to people watching it, you know, trust me, come with me, I'll take you by the hand, I'm going to let go, you're on your own, but then I'll remind you that I'm here. And when I say, "Is this a cat or a dog?" a second time, it's like reminding people that they're not just awash, you know, I haven't abandoned them, I'm still listening, I'm still there. And you want to liberate people enough, you know, this idea, the theme of this festival is freedom. So you want to liberate people enough to sort of get their own thing from the images, but occasionally you want to remind them that there's still somebody suggesting a route through the film.
You're also a former film critic, and I mean, how do you define yourself? I mean, are you a film historian or a filmmaker? I mean, Buddha used to make in the 80s Islamic cinema, and in the 90s Scorsese did the Viaggio in Italia. I mean, are those people, I mean, inspirations for you? I mean, in that sense?
Yeah, I particularly loved Martin Scorsese's history of American cinema and then Viaggio in Italia. I loved the fact that when he gets into a film clip, he stays in it, and we look at the film clip for longer than you expect. You know, sometimes things in modern culture are so fast, and that kind of fast is surprisingly exhausting in some ways. You know, and when so much of modern TV, you realise that it's the aesthetics of the glance. You're supposed to just glance because you know the shot is going to move on. But in Scorsese's history of American cinema, he would introduce a film and stay in it and talk about it, and then talk some more about it, and then talk some more about it. And I loved that, you know, you could call it the quietude or the sense of being in the moment, you know. So I thought that was fantastic, and I stole that idea quite a lot.
Our films definitely have that quality.
You steal from everywhere.
Yeah. But yeah, apart from Bergman's and Alexander, there's also Kjell Gredes, Hugo and Josephine. And Sweden used to be quite good at children's film at the time, not so much today, but what would you say, I mean, when it comes to countries and territories, which are the most prominent when it comes to
for children's cinema?
Yeah. Historically and today.
Yeah, today still the best country in the world for children's cinema, I think, is Iran. You know, Iran has got this organisation called Kanun, the Centre for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, and it predates the revolution, as I understand, but it's fantastic, you know, and so many of the great films that about cinema come from Iran. And you could say that that's because Iranian filmmakers have not been allowed to talk about adult themes like sex or violence, so they've been forced onto other parts of the human spectrum. But But if that's so, that's true, and that's disgraceful, obviously. But what they have done with that other part of the human spectrum, i.e. these young human beings that we often in the Western world think of as proto-human beings, are people who are yet to become human beings, when of course young people are some of the best human beings. So the Iranians have been brilliantly unsentimental at looking at children, but other countries as well. And I have to say, even if Sweden isn't maybe making as many great children's films, it's fantastic that Sweden has made so many, and Denmark.
Proportion, yeah.
Like Astrid Henning-Jensen, one of the great writers. But even if you go to Albania, a country where I've been filming in recently, great films about children.
Yeah. But in the film you mentioned cinema as one of the youngest of art forms, and also the one most obsessed with kids, because they change so fast.
Yes.
Would you describe cinema when at its best as a youth medium? I mean, in its imminent ability to explore and discover new worlds.
Well, I think what I mean by that is, children are so in the moment. When they're happy, and when they're sad, and it's like this morning didn't happen, and this evening will not happen. It's just here and now. And what is cinema? It is so brilliant at here and now. It's so brilliant. When we watch a film, we just think that it's a present tense medium, and children are really similar to that. So I think that's where that affinity comes from in many ways, that sense of the kind of excitement, the exhilaration, the fear of right here, right now. And I only realised that towards the end of making this film, in conversations with Adam, one of the producers of the film, that was sort of what I was trying to get at, that sense of this present tense. There's nothing like looking at those early. Have you seen those early Lumiere shots of Stockholm from 1896, 1897? It takes your breath away. It's so moving. Look at those people. Look at their hats. Look at their walking sticks. And if you look at footage of a child, it takes your breath away. When I look at a picture of my younger self, it's like there's no way I was ever that boy. That was a moment. That was, what was he thinking? It's very emotional to look at that. And any of us, if we look at pictures of our younger selves, you think, wow, did I have that hair? Did I have that face that is like the moon? Is that incredible? And cinema is like that. Greta Garbo is dead, but when we see her, she is still alive on screen. The light from the distant star. The star is dead, but the light is still traveling.
Yeah. But when and how did you first explore cinema? I mean, as a kid.
Yeah, I just fell in love with it. It was like a tractor beam. I remember in Star Trek. In Star Trek they say they're dragging us in on a tractor beam, and I remember saying, I was startled. Like, see these lights now in our eyes. It's like startling. That's what cinema felt like to me. I was extremely good at certain things like space and image, and I was pretty bad at some other things. And cinema had all those things that I was good at. It was like it takes you by the hand, and that lovely phrase of the great writer Joseph Campbell. He has this phrase, the rapture of self-loss. You lose yourself when you look at this flickering, luminous thing, and it feels fantastic.
So it's the freedom.
It's freedom. Freedom, yes, but it's like a kind of surrogate self. It's like experimenting. Before you've been in love, you see love on the screen. Before you have experienced real loss or grief, you've seen loss and grief on a big screen. So you can have these experiences, but in a safe way, and that's really interesting. And that really means that cinema becomes like an empathy machine it allows you to see into the lives of other people without being too risky. You know, so then you ask yourself a question, this appalling thing that has happened in the Philippines in the last week, you know, unimaginable grief, unimaginable tragedy, unimaginable suffering. What are the best films I've seen from anywhere in the world in the last few years are from Philippines. Now, more than ever, if we really, really want to understand what has happened in the Philippines, we need to watch the films of Lav Diaz, we need to watch the films of Karen de la Cruz, all these great Filipino directors. And that's why, this is one of the more serious reasons why I love the medium of cinema so much, that it can really ennoble us as human beings. It can make us better than we were before, which is fantastic.
Interesting. Before we let the audience in, I just have one more question.
Yes.
Many more, but you stated in the film that most of the children's films, the best ones, are made by women because they spend more time with kids. Or what is your theory of that?
My theory on that is that women are just great filmmakers. Simple.
Yeah.
You know, and when you when you look anywhere in the world, you know, if you ask who the best filmmakers are today, I would say Dorota Kieserzolska in Poland, Kira Muratova she's living in, I think, Riga now, but she's working in the Russian language. Mania Akbari, Samira Makhmalbaf. So it's simply that. It's not even that, I don't think that women have a special affinity with children. They're just great filmmakers. And so it's not a surprise that many of the best films about children are made by women.
Makes sense. Do you have any questions from the audience? Yeah?
Okay, thank you.
There's a mic there.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Also, Finland has to be mentioned because there was a Finnish film also.
Yes,
and I may be wrong, but I think I saw there was also in the beginning there was a Finnish title, so I'm hoping that this will be shown also in Finland and in many countries. Yes, okay, thank you. As you can see, we are all here gathered to see the movies still as children. Do you think that the experience is changing because, as you said, there are smaller cameras, but also the way to show films is not always in these kind of big theaters. It's getting smaller screens, and also is the experience changing, and is that good or bad?
Yes, the experience is changing. I would argue that the art of cinema, the basic art of cinema hasn't changed very much, but the way we watch films has changed profoundly. How many times do you go to the cinema and see that happening, that curtain go up? How many times do you go to the cinema and see what Asplund talked about, this infinite space? He said this building was extremely, I love this phrase, extremely un-architectural. What he means is there's no roof. We imagine that we are in Terramina or somewhere like that. And so if movie-going was enchanted, if it was magical, then that is changing. You know, we watch films on screens this size, which of course is stupid. But we watch films on our home screens, etc. And I think that's a big change. You know, I think that I'm quite optimistic in some way. I think that we are social creatures. You know, if you look at what's happening in the music world, people are going to more live music events than ever. They want to get sweaty together. They want to have an experience together. And so I think that I'm optimistic that people will still want to come into places like this, which feels like a tent somewhere, and have collective experiences. But that's the big change.
Anyone else?
I can see an arm like that.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, among all the movies that you mentioned, there are quite a few that are the conventional, let's say, Hollywood movies, mainstream, what we mostly consume here in Sweden. I think many of us. how does Hollywood fit in all this? What do you think personally? Thank you.
I love American cinema. I think that American cinema, in some ways, made movies dreamlike, and that's a really crucial aspect of it. So I'm not snobby about American cinema, but if you choose to look at children in cinema, for example, you begin to notice that some of those deep ideas in American society have very much influenced the kind of children we see on screen. So, for example, the idea of the hero, the individual hero, which is profound in American culture, much less so in, for example, Swedish culture, or where I come from, in Irish culture. So that idea of the hero, you find it in a lot of films in the US. A lot of the children are quite heroic, and whilst in real life there are lots of children who are very heroic, it means that you've got a sort of fantasy child, or a kind of ideal child in American cinema, and I wasn't so interested in looking at that fantasy or ideal side. That's projecting too much onto the child, an adult view of the world, and so that's why there aren't too many American films in here. There are lots of other great American films that we could have put in here, but I didn't want to focus on that too much, because that's one worldview, and you want to get many worldviews.